everyone's gone quiet, so I need to get on with it. Very warm welcome to you all. My name is Christian. I'm the director at the Centre for Social Justice. It is a real pleasure to welcome you here this morning for the launch of what I think is probably one of the most important reports I've seen come out of the Centre. I've been here about 6 years. For me, this topic is core social justice territory. What I've been surprised about through the course of our leading this process is people asking why the Centre for Social Justice has done a piece of work on modern day slavery. And I've always been shocked by that surprise, because for me there's nothing more socially unjust than what we're revealing today and what we're presenting. The CSJ was inspired by the social reformers, particularly of the 19th century, and Wilberforce and Lincoln and Shaftesbury, and all of those people who dared to stand up and say that actually what is taking place is not okay, and we're not satisfied with what we see. And for me, there is, as I say, nothing more pertinent to that than what we're here to discuss today. What we're publishing in these 230 pages, and there's a good summary at the front, so don't worry if you won't get through all of it. But what we're saying is that Britain is full of hope, but it's also full of something that's very ugly. And in these pages, we present both of those things. Some of the most horrific stories you will read about human beings contained in these pages, but also some of the most inspiring work you'll ever see taking place across this country too. And this is a report, we hope, that acts as a message of hope, and it is a rallying call to everybody. If you're in government, there's something you can do. If you lead a business, there's something you can do. If you're a social worker, there's something you can do. If you're a police officer or a prison governor, there's something you can do. If you drive a bus, there's something you can do. That is the point of today. It's not about pointing the finger at government and saying, you need to do the following 80 things. It's about saying, as a nation, we all need to stand up and take this seriously and fight it, because it is not good enough that in modern Britain we see people enslaved, treated as commodities. I'm going to sit down in a minute, but I really want to thank the panel who have agreed to be with us this morning, and I want to thank those who have supported this process. The panel is an outstanding panel. Andrew Wallace, who has led this process brilliantly, is a fantastic chief executive in Bristol of Unseen. And Unseen is a wonderful organisation working to get people out of slavery and trafficking in the UK. It's built a brilliant network in Bristol to get that job done. Fraser Nelson. Fraser is a terrific friend of the CSJ. He sits on our advisory council, of course, editor of The Spectator, and writes a weekly column in the Telegraph. Fraser is one of the most passionate journalists you'll meet, particularly on topics like this. So thank you very much, Fraser, for being with us. Kevin Bales is a fantastic advocate through the Wilberforce Institute, and is co-founder of Free the Slaves, an amazing institution. So Kevin, thank you for being with us today, for what you'll say about the international perspective and about this report. And Frank Field, of course, a parliamentary giant, a social reformer within the House of Commons, a key Labour figure. And it's really important to us that we work on a cross-party basis on this issue. There should be no hint of partisan party politics whatsoever when it comes to modern slavery. So Frank, it's terrific to have you with us, and we're looking forward to what you think Parliament can do in response. A couple more things before I sit down. I want to thank our supporters, Manpower, the Doha Institute, the Savile Row Foundation, and others who have given generously to make this process happen. The CSJ could do none of this without your leadership and your incredible courage to back things that would make a difference. For those who use Twitter, we won't be offended if you'll head down in your smartphone throughout this session. I would suggest a hashtag of It Happens Here would be ideal. It's the name of the report, and it's a clear message that we want to bring out from this morning. So Andrew is going to speak, and I'm going to be fairly tight on the timings, but for about 10 to 12 minutes on what the report says and why we've done it. Andrew, over to you.
Good morning. May I thank the CSJ right off the top for carrying out and having the courage to carry out this review. And to those of you that are on the working group, my heartfelt thanks, and in particular to my Deputy Chair, James Ewins. And special thanks is for Lucy Moore, the lead researcher, who worked tirelessly over the last 20 months. And I think collectively we can be justly proud of this report. What we began 20 months ago was to set ourselves the ambitious target of covering forward We began by setting ourselves an ambitious target of coming forward not only with a review of the current situation in the UK, but also to come up with a comprehensive and evidence-based recommendations to create a strategy that would enable the UK to effectively eradicate slavery. A few weeks ago we had the horse meat scandal. Paralysed politicians, businesses, everyone blaming anyone and everyone, and a media feeding frenzy. Yet when it comes to the real scandal in this country of modern slavery, it is still a subject matter that does not yet fully connect with the public, media, or politicians. This report shines a shocking light on the reality. As a country, we'd rather not admit or comprehensively deal with the reality of modern slavery. Yet today there are men, women and children from the UK, from overseas, who are enslaved in our cities, towns and villages. They are dehumanised, they are treated nothing more than a mere commodity being bought and sold. We find ourselves in this situation not just because of society's demand for slavery, and that in and of itself is shocking, but because there's been a glaring deficit in our response to date. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And in our investigation, it has highlighted a lack of leadership at the national level and including within the political arena. There is a pressing need for independent strategic leadership. Though the formation of the Interdepartmental Ministerial Group on Human Trafficking is to be welcomed, it is fundamentally unable to provide this consistent strategic oversight and challenge. We call for the urgent appointment via statute of an anti-slavery commissioner to bring vital leadership, continuity, focus, independence, coordination, accountability, and crucially, a voice for victims. 64% of people we polled support the appointment of this role to oversee the efforts to combat modern slavery in the UK. This report is about enabling and accelerating that process of eliminating slavery. If we don't begin to implement the recommendations within this report, then the current systems we have in place will carry on delivering the same unsatisfactory results. This report is to be used as a guide, a manual, for proactively moving forward and engaging with the issues. It is not some pick and choose list. We start with the Commissioner and everything else flows from there. Our proposal for a Modern Slavery Act is not only about legislating for the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, but bringing together the current disparate legislation which criminalises human trafficking and slavery or servitude under one new act. Removing one of the acts from the immigration framework, which is illogical. The Modern Slavery Act will also include statutory obligation for the relevant agencies, police, criminal justice system and children's services, to identify victims of modern slavery through investigating the indicators. And it will also include a statutory statement of non-prosecution of victims of modern slavery. Throughout our research, we've seen a damaging and pervasive misunderstanding of modern slavery as primarily an immigration issue, one of border security, an immigration crime. This is wrong. Modern slavery is first and foremost a criminal issue and a fundamental abuse of human rights. Too often we discover victims being treated as illegal immigrants, their experience as victims of this appalling crime treated as just some secondary concern. As we investigated the role of the UKBA, we found an agency overstretched and under-resourced. UKBA officers are tasked to make decisions about whether an individual has been a victim of human trafficking, in addition to managing their heavy caseloads of asylum. This has ultimately led to costly judicial reviews of decisions made and a widespread lack of confidence in the ability of the UKBA to be an impartial player due to their overriding immigration and asylum bias. Therefore, the UKBA must be relieved of its role as a competent authority. And the UK Human Trafficking Centre should become the sole decision-making body with decisions monitored by the Anti-Slavery Commissioner to increase transparency and accountability. Within government, lead responsibility needs to be moved from the immigration minister to the policing minister to reflect the nature of this crime. Our chapter on policing this crime is a how-to manual for chief constables and PCCs. The clear message coming from police that we spoke to up and down the country was, we are not tasked to look for this problem of modern slavery, and nor are we proactively looking for it. It also became apparent that there is a high level of ignorance and misunderstanding of what modern slavery is. Too often it is seen as just an immigration issue for the UKVA to deal with. In one case we heard of a woman who was trafficked into the UK from abroad to be sexually exploited. She escaped from the brothel where she was held, ran to the police station, and upon telling her story was promptly arrested as an illegal immigrant. Too often police are unclear about how to proceed if they do discover slavery. Better training and awareness raising for the police is crucial. We are not equipped to fight this crime. Increasing numbers of British men, women and children are being enslaved here in the UK. Recent landmark cases such as Rochdale, Oxford, Telford, Blackpool, Derby, Essex, Leighton Buzzard, Ipswich, Gloucestershire, the East End of London have shown how widespread and disparate nature of this horrific crime is. We have been shocked to discover that many of the officially appointed first responders responsible for identifying potential victims of slavery are not even aware of their role and don't even know what to do if they discover it. Training of all first responders is paramount. Recognition of the indicators and what to do when it is found is crucial. The government recently awarded a £50,000 contract to charities to deliver training to the front line, and we welcome this development. But let me put that figure in context. Modern-day slavery is the second largest illicit trade in the world. It will overtake the drugs trade in the next 5 years if left unchecked. In recent months, the independent UK Drugs Policy Commission has highlighted the fact that the government spends £3 billion a year on a policy that is often self-defeating. In terms of combating slavery, we spent a minute fraction of this. 2 years ago, the Salvation Army was awarded the contract for adult survivor care. This has been a positive move, increasing variety and availability of care to adult survivors. But this support now needs to be augmented. A longer contract needs to be awarded to bring stability. Our evidence shows that the 45-day reflection period is anything but a time of reflection. And much more focus needs to be placed on long-term reintegration of survivors, enabling them to fully contribute to society and fully recover. We must shift our understanding of success for survivors as one of rebuilding their lives, increasing their resilience to re-trafficking, and that has to be a significant priority. We're concerned that despite the large increase in survivors accessing support and the length of time for decisions to be reached, there has been no increase in the budget. And it's alarming that recently introduced financial constraints means that people are beginning to exit support in utterly vulnerable positions, including forced into street homelessness. In relation to children, regardless of nationality, the evidence is shocking. We were stunned to hear of social workers who received no training or teaching on the issues surrounding modern slavery before they qualify. Leading local authorities are forced to teach newly qualified social workers just how to spot the indicators of slavery. The national response to trafficked children is appallingly disparate, and vulnerable children are being failed. Child victims of modern slavery are being missed, a shocking number are disappearing from local authority care, largely because of the lack of safe accommodation, and the inability of children's services to identify and mitigate the risks. We've been told that foster carers have been given responsibility for trafficked kids, and not even being told that that is the case of what they're having to deal with, and not made aware of the risks. We heard of a child so devastatingly brainwashed that he used the first opportunity he could find to escape, jumping out the window during a dentist visit. We've also been disturbed by the increasing evidence of the trafficking of British kids for sexual exploitation. The current trial, based from Oxford, where alleged traffickers brutally brand their victims as a mark of ownership, shows the disgraceful reality of exploitation that is going on in 2013. We've been shocked with evidence which revealed that children abused in cases of internal trafficking are often seen as complicit or compliant in their abuse. What is in reality survival can be perceived by police and social workers as willingness. We were horrified to hear of the plight of one young girl who refused to have sex that her trafficker was telling us she needed to have. So in response, he grabbed her by the hair and pulled her down the stairs, face first. Do you think she would say no the second time? Or what her friend would say? There is an urgent need for these kids to be freed from the systematic abuse, and we firmly believe that the perspective of human trafficking in modern slavery can help develop an understanding of both victims and perpetrators. And this will equip the police and others on the front line to tackle this appalling crime. which is happening here. Modern slavery is a critical challenge requiring business, government and the non-profit sector to collaborate and work together in order to create lasting and innovative solutions. But we found little evidence of this during our review. Business must do more to ensure that they play their part in eradicating slavery. A critical area of responsibility for business is the way that they scrutinise their supply and product chains, as well as business practices. However, government must give a lead here and enact the Transparency in UK Company Supply Chains Bill. It requires large companies to disclose what efforts they are making to ensure that their supply and product chains, as well as their business practices, are free from slavery. In polling, 82% supported the enactment of this legislation. Yet the government chooses to be deaf to the will of the people. As the recent horse meat scandal showed, horrible things can be hidden in unmonitored supply chains. The most horrible of all is slavery, and more must be done to shine a light on this. This report aims to mark the beginning of a step change in the UK's response to slavery. We can lead the world again in our responses to this crime and the restoration of its survivors. This report is about how we can respond effectively and collectively. It may be uncomfortable reading at times, but modern slavery is an uncomfortable reality for us in this country. We expose the reality of this appalling crime and highlight how the UK can constructively engage with the problem and see modern slavery eradicated. It may be politically naive of me to expect the government to accept and vigorously implement all of these recommendations, but my challenge is this: how on earth have we arrived in a place where there is no longer any ambition or leadership within politics to eradicate slavery? Where is the unshakable determination of Wilberforce? We must do the right thing, regardless of focus groups, polls or votes at the ballot box. It is not, it never will be right to have slaves in our midst. To not do everything within our collective power to free slaves, to protect them, to prevent slavery in the first place, actively prosecute those that want to carry out this illicit trade, is not an option. It is an issue that transcends partisanship. It calls for visionary leadership and direction. Society will always be judged by how it deals with the least in its society. And the least in the UK are our slaves. So I commend this report to you. I ask that you read it in detail and that you join with me in seeking to put an end to modern day slavery.
Indeed, there's obviously going to be time at the end for questions, and I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for the work you've done over the last 18 months, the working group here at the front of the room, and thank you very much indeed for all the time and energy you put into this process too. Fraser, thanks so much for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Christian. I'd like to start with a phrase that I heard on the radio when I was about 15 years old. It was from Rabbi Lionel Blue, who I'm sure most of you will have heard, giving thought for the day over the years. He spoke about a condition which he said that we collectively suffer from. It was called moral long-sightedness. He said this was the ability to see and get worked up about things that were happening thousands of miles away on the other side of the world, that might happen in 100 years in the future, that did happen 200 years ago, that we feel we need to apologize for. We can get so angry and outraged about those things while being blind to the evil happening under our own noses. Now, this is a recurring theme in the Centre for Social Justice's work, and I think nowhere is that phrase more relevant than it is in the instance of modern day slavery. It's quite literally under our noses. This tie that I bought, I've no idea whether it was made by tiny hands thousands of miles away. It can be in the food that we eat. All of these can be produced, at least in part, by modern day slaves. And it's this condition, by collectively suffering from this moral long-sightedness, but we can't quite bring ourselves to believe that we have allowed this virulent new strain of an ancient evil to come back, and to come back in this great city of ours, London, which is probably one of the world capitals of modern day slavery, right now, a global hub of what we were congratulating ourselves for eradicating not so long ago. Now, there's of course a great question as to the language used for this. Do you really call it slavery? When a few of you will have heard the reports yesterday from the CSJ report, do part of us think, well, this is a bit of hype, really, because this isn't the same as African tribesmen, or indeed Scottish clansmen that did happen, being sold into the slave trade in the old days. It's not the same as that. Of course it's not in exactly the same way, not in the clear-cut terms of right and wrong. But I think this is one area where we Brits can look to the Americans for examples. And I think specifically to a speech that Barack Obama gave only a few months ago. Now, no American uses the word slavery lightly. It evokes one of the most painful chapters in America's history. But Barack Obama said it is no longer possible to avoid the nature of the evil which has recurred in our society, but most importantly, it's no longer tolerable to use the euphemisms that we have been using to date. Now, the power of the CSJ report, I think, rests in the case studies it showed. You don't need to worry about semantics when you can read this report and find out what's happening to people in our country right now, and then decide the word fits. When a man is forced to do manual labour 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, that's slavery. When a girl is locked in a flat to be raped by 90 men in a weekend, that's slavery. And when a 15-year-old Albanian girl is sold to a pimp in Birmingham for £3,500, that is slavery. And that's what we've got in our country today. Now, it's ironic that this has become easier to understand by a scandal about horse meat. It's strange how we all got so worried about a little bit of horsey being included in the food chain. And, you know, we as a spectator were very worried about it. We ran a feature on what's best to drink, of course. Scotch whisky, in case you were wondering. But what it did through light home is just the way that everything, in this globalised era, that everything is reduced now by an incredibly long supply chain, which can go right around the way. You can have prawns peeled in Thailand, served up here. You can have a Swedish lasagna company with a French intermediary using intermediaries in Romania and Cyprus. If you've got a supply chain that long, then all sorts of things can creep into it because nobody asks the right questions. And that's what it's about. It's about not asking the right questions. And it's strange that we care a lot about of course we care about the environment. And one example of modern slavery was found in the Philippines recently when two slaves were aboard a slave ship and they actually got boarded off the coast of New Zealand by an environmental regulator who was wanting to see if that ship was putting too much pollution into the atmosphere. The regulator actually came across to the slaves who told him what was happening, but they couldn't intervene. That wasn't within their remit. But if we care enough about something, then we can have the entire supply chain called to attention. That is, and I actually think here, that brands in global capitalism are the answer to this and not the problem. Now, this iPad I've got here, you can be pretty sure that no slaves were produced making that, because if they were, then the journalists are crawling all over every single part of Apple's supply chain, wanting to see if they're using the equivalent of sweatshop labour. But to go back to my controversial tie, I have no idea who made this. The Egg McMuffin, which I'm embarrassed to admit I ate on the way here in lieu of breakfast. Can you be guaranteed that no slaves were made to produce that? Or you think, yes, because it's McDonald's, the eggs are picked in Britain. Well, they are processed in Britain, but it wasn't so long ago that an example of modern-day slavery was found in an egg farm which supplies McDonald's. So it can happen under our noses and on our breakfast table. Now, the thing is here that you've got to start, there's nothing abstract about this. This is the thing. you can go to this website, it's one called Slavery Footprint. I recommend you go to it if you haven't already, where you can type in, tell them who you are, what your consumption habits are, how old you are, where you live, and they'll calculate how many slaves work for you. Statistically, how many people in slavery will have been involved in producing the things which you consume. Now for me, the figure is about 50, which is a pretty shocking figure, but I'm afraid to say it's a rather credible figure. Now, if we just simply get more angry about this, if we demand the same sort of action against slavery as we demand against other things like the conditions in which chickens are kept, for example, there are strictures, we make sure that's right, but we come to a situation where the chickens are fine, but the men who tend to them maybe are not. Now, Edward Burke famously said that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. That's what we also saw to an extent with the horse meat scandal. All that required for horse meat to get into the food chain was for the right questions not to be asked. Now, I believe that there are plenty of good men and women in our parliament, plenty of good men and women in our government, and they can act on this. The great power of the CSJ report tells you exactly what you can do to place, in the same way that they've done in California, to actually require companies to start asking these questions about whether anybody in our supply chain could have been involved in modern day slavery. Now, these are very practical, very effective ways. Of course, we cannot right the wrongs of the whole planet. We cannot change conditions in Africa, conditions in East Asia, but we can make sure that the food we eat every day and the clothes we put on every day are now completely disconnected with the emergence of modern day slavery, and in doing that we can deal it a great blow. So we do have it, I think, within our power. It's practical, the solutions are here in this report, to get rid of this new modern day slavery as surely as we get rid of the old. Thank you.
Indeed. Moving straight on, do obviously be thinking about the questions you want to ask. Moving straight on to Professor Kevin Bales. Kevin has one of the longest biographies I've ever seen.
Start.
I won't even bother with it because we'll be here all day. But the main things, as I said earlier, he's Professor of Contemporary Slavery at the Wilberforce Institute for the Study of Slavery and Emancipation. He was co-founder of Freed Slaves. Kevin has been an invaluable advisor to this process. He's internationally renowned as an expert on anti-slavery measures, and it's a real privilege to have you here. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. It's my job to put a little bit of perspective on the larger report and on what's going on in the UK. I think it's important for me to back up historically and actually remind us that there have been 4 great anti-slavery movements in world history. The first one started in 1787, right here in London. The second was the one that ended well, but badly, because it finished with the Civil War in the United States in 1865. The third also began here in Britain. It was the Congo Reform Association Congo Slavery Campaign, which attacked the horrific, enormous enslavement of Congolese workers under King Leopold. A death toll that went up around 10 million, according to the best estimates. And the fourth great anti-slavery movement is the one that we're engaged in right now. The one that we're engaged in right now. It's different because it's not the movement to change the law to make slavery illegal. It's the movement to end slavery forever. It's the movement to eradicate slavery from the planet, which we can do in ways that I'll explain in just a moment. But one of the things that's very interesting and different about this fourth great anti-slavery movement is that it's backwards. The previous 3 movements began from the grassroots. People at the grassroots said there's a horrible situation, we must work against slavery. Abolitionists came up from the bottom and pushed politicians and others to move ahead on this issue. Some leaders began, like Wilberforce, to take it on, and they were crucial in that process. They were grassroots, bottom-up movements. This, strangely, began in the 1990s when politicians in a number of countries became aware of human trafficking in particular, and modern forms of slavery, and began to legislate with a certain amount of ignorance, the broader part of the issue, with a certain amount of confusion about, is this about immigration, is this about just about sexual exploitation, or what? It was a confusing time in the mid-1990s when a large number of countries began to legislate on this issue. Now, I have the happy job of working on this issue all the time. And one of the things that I do is advise governments as they go through the process of rewriting the laws that they wrote in the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s. Norway is going through the same process that Britain is going through based on this report. The United States has been rewriting its law every 4 years for the last 16 years. The ECOWAS community has also been rewriting. The point is, all around the world, people are beginning to understand the complexity of this problem, and that's fine, because we've learned from exactly this kind of research, exactly this kind of report in most countries. But this report and this situation is unique in one way globally, and that is this. To my knowledge, this is the only complete root and branch review of any country's regulations and legislation. Other countries are attempting a piecemeal reform based on the piecemeal original drafting of the legislation. This report sets out the first time I have ever seen a complete review and a sound, thought-through approach to resolving the discrepancies and the confusions and the contradictions that came in the early legislation. Now, that alone is something that we should be very proud of, because it means that if actualized, if brought into law, Britain will jump ahead of all the countries in the world in terms of its provision, in terms of what it's going to be doing about modern slavery. Now, I think the second thing that's very important to say about this report, and I was very honored to be able to serve as an advisor to the working group, is that this was not about party politics. The prime directive of those who took part in the working group was all about the protection of survivors of slavery, doing the best job they could do to make sure that those who survived slavery are cared for, that they increase the likelihood that cases of slavery and human trafficking will be detected and prosecuted and convicted, that they all focus on that. I was very impressed by this group, this working group, across the political spectrum, putting aside any notions of ideology and politics, and saying, our job is to bring slavery to an end in Great Britain. And they put together a plan, a roadmap, to make sure that indeed can happen. Now, I want to hit that note one more time and say, I hope that the little bit of political twisting and turning that I was seeing in the press yesterday will begin to evaporate on this issue. Because it's true that you can turn almost anything into a political hook or jibe or twist. It's true. And if that's the way you feel that you must do, I know it's hard when you're involved in that work to sometimes step away and step back and to take a larger view. But there's something going on here that's not political. There's something going on here that, or maybe we should say it's political in the most profound sense. Obstruction, cherry picking, the confusion of these objects with political goals will, and I appreciate this sounds almost melodramatic, will lead to people remaining in slavery. Will lead to, and again, I know this from many years of experience in anti-slavery work, will lead to people dying. People will die if reforms are not made. People are dying today because we do not have the right sets of laws in place. Now that's a shocker, I appreciate it, and I hate to be such a depressing speaker, but it's true. If we don't get it right, people die. And I have to say, I know this well. I've worked with many governments. I will admit to you, worked with governments where we did our best, where we actually made miscalculations, and we had to see people die. Because slavery is based in violence. Slavery is the motive. Violence is the way that people are held in slavery. Slavery does not exist without violence. And violence can lead to all the horrific things that it can do, including that of the loss of life. Now, there needs to be this coherent and joined up response. If we do this piecemeal, if we try to break this apart and cherry pick it, we'll end up back right where we were. We're going to end up like other countries, and you would think, I've been working a lot with the Norwegian government. You would think it's such a small government with such agreement, and they're so serious in Norway, you would think they would be able to, put this together. And they're having exactly the same confusion and arguments that have been dealt with in this review, particularly about the relationship between immigration rules and criminal rules, and so forth. Now, why is this so important for Britain? Well, because Britain pats itself on the back and says, didn't we do a great job bringing slavery to an end in the slave trade in 1807? And so, well, yeah, we did. And it was a good thing. But you can't stop there. It's not good enough to pat yourself on the back for something that happens more than 200 years ago. It's time to get the job finished. And the good news is that we actually know that we can bring slavery to an end globally, not just in Britain, but globally. There are about 27 million people in the world in slavery today. That's double the number that were removed from Africa in the entire 350 years of the transatlantic slave trade. They generate somewhere between $40 and $50 billion a year into the global economy. Those are big numbers. But in fact, the 27 million people in slavery are the smallest fraction of the global population to ever be enslaved. The $40 to $50 billion a year that generated into the global economy is the tiniest fraction of the global economy ever represented by slave labor. There's a law against slavery in every single country. It's rejected by all religious groups, moral groups, the philosophy that we all share as global citizens reject slavery out of hand. No economy, no large industry rests upon slavery. There's a lot of criminals who are making a lot of money out of slavery, but no significant industry rests on slavery. The point is, slavery is standing on the edge of its own extinction. It can be pushed over that precipice. We can bring it to an end on the planet Earth, and we think it would probably take between 25 and 30 years. But in Great Britain, this could be accomplished much more quickly. We have a tight border where border agency can be trained up much better, and we can look for those people who are caught in international trafficking. We're not part of the Schengen agreements and the Schengen zone. We have a fairly low number of people compared to other countries who are enslaved here. When we train police, emergency workers, and teachers, and so forth to see slavery in front of them, we'll find them. We know that happens. We know that they can be found. And Britain, out of all the countries in the world, and I will tell you there is slavery in every single country. I used to say everywhere but Iceland, and then an Icelandic MP stopped me and said, no, dude, we've got it too. There's slavery in every single country in the world. But this, because of its unique history and its unique geography and its unique and powerful legal system, could be the first country in the world to achieve something which the world has been waiting for about 5,000 years. A country, a society, a people without slavery. Thank you.
Been such an important part of this process, and thank you for that international perspective and what you said about the report. For a parliamentary perspective, I'd delight to hand over to Frank Phil. Frank has been a terrific friend of the Centre for Social Justice over the years. We've worked together on a number of important topics, and Frank, thanks for being with us on this one today, and tell us what we can do in the British Parliament to play that part.
once again salute the Centre for Social Justice. The report today could be a turning point in history, and I'll return to the CSJ suggesting how the work that they now ought to undertake to make sure that this day does mark the end of slavery in this country. To relate this whole process, this crucially important report, and I salute the author and the working party for the huge amount of work that they've done, we need, in one aspect, to ground it in politics. And last week, to coincide with this report, I wrote to the Prime Minister suggesting what action the government should take and where I thought Parliament would support the government in that action. The first thing that the letter challenges the Prime Minister to do is to change the name, to call a spade a spade. The idea that we should call this evil trafficking, the idea that somehow Wilberforce would have been successful in seeing the abolition of slavery in this country and in the British Empire, and going around mumbling about trafficking, I think we wouldn't have been celebrating, I think rather falsely, as we did not so long ago, the great marks in the abolition, or landmarks in the abolition of slavery. We need the government to start using the language that it is. We are talking about slavery and slavery that exists in this country. Secondly, to drive this, the government needs to appoint, as other countries are beginning to do so with real success, an anti-slavery commission. The commissioner would be charged with the collecting of data, the driving of policy, and the raising of the urgency of this issue. The idea that this is somehow an academic point, but we're talking about something happening over in faraway countries. The report grounds this into this country, not merely bad enough as that is, importing people in this country to be slaves, but actually recruiting, capturing British people, particularly children, into that trade. Now, if that doesn't raise the British anger, I don't know what will do. But of course, if we continue to call it trafficking, it's all about trade, isn't it? Not about capturing people and denying them of their liberty. And changing the name from trafficking to slavery will begin to drive policy. I'll give you one example. The report details how the police specialise in prosecuting the slaves rather than the slave owners. It's the slaves that are the illegal immigrants. They're much easier to get hold of, they are much easier to prosecute than the slave owners themselves. A change in language is not merely semantics. It will denote a change in policy because the name will begin to drive government policy. Fourthly, the report emphasises how important the gains are from slavery to the slave owners. We need a policy of seizing the assets of the slave owners in this country or those who trade elsewhere but have their assets here, as we do for other crimes. That will begin to change the balance against the free movement of labour, as people like to call it, trafficking, to one of an urgency, which summarises really where we are today. And the fifth thing, which is not in the letter, but it was quite clear listening to the panel this morning, the government has almost no business with the usual channels, think up all sorts of things that we should do in Parliament, because we're fearful of the press suggesting that we've got no work to do and that we go home early. The reason for that is that there's no House of Lords bill. One way that the government could regain momentum in its legislative programme for the second half of this programme is to give up these ludicrous debates about yet more changes to the Constitution and deal with this central issue about human freedom and how that human freedom is denied probably to a growing number of people in this country. Now, the 5 things the Prime Minister could do if he had any sense of urgency, of any moral priorities for the Queen's speech, which will be upon us only too soon. But a last and gentle challenge to CSJ. We're all going to have a good day today, aren't we? We're all, in a sense, quite rightly congratulating ourselves because the work that we've been doing is beginning to get the public recognition that it should. But there's one activity that is to provide governments with vision. But vision, if they're going to become a reality, need hard work, organisation, both through the media and through the political process itself. And I therefore hope that at a very short stage, you've already done it and I've missed it, the CSJ will now look to how this great report, which will turn, I hope, a page in history of which we can all be proud, how we now get down to the dirty business of making sure that report goes onto the statute book and drives policy and eliminates slavery in this country.